The motorcycle we're talking about today has a truly unique technical mix. In fact, it's one of a kind on the market. It has a 21-inch front wheel, an 18-inch rear wheel, an aluminum frame, an aluminum swing arm, and a 3-cylinder engine iron short. There's nothing else like it on the market. It costs 8,690 euros, but above all, it's packed with features and gadgets. The motorcycle in today's video is the Zontes 703F Adventure. First of all, a quick and comprehensive summary of the technical aspects of this Zontes 703 FA motorcycle that truly drew a significant amount of attention at the last EICMA. Imagine taking a shaker, carefully adding in some dynamic elements from a street sport bike and others from capable enduro, a bit of lightweight aluminium long travel suspension and distinctive 21 and 18-inch wheels. Shake it all up well and you'll get a unique project on the market. The 703F definitely has quite a few features to impress, starting with the chassis, perimeter aluminum frame that in this configuration weighs 14 kilograms, but can go down to 11 for the sport version, along with an aluminum swing arm and subframe, the latter weighing 3.8 kilograms. Looking at it this way, all the elements for a sporty crossover are there, but what does Zontes do? They play their trump card and fit adjustable Marzocchi suspension with 180 millimeters of travel, and a pair of tubeless spoke wheels, 18 and 21 inches. A truly unusual combination that is completed by the engine, an inline 3-cylinder with 699 cc, 95 horsepower and 75 newton meters of torque, equipped with a slipper clutch. All this results in a claimed curb weight of 236 kilograms, which on our scale comes to 225 kilograms with 5 liters of fuel in the tank and a weight distribution of 51% at the front and 49% at the rear. An interesting fact, Zontes manufactures everything in-house, from the frame to the engine. Electronics, just what you need. On the 703F you'll find switchable traction control and switchable ABS on the rear wheel for off-road riding. A few interesting numbers. The tank holds 22 liters of fuel and the seat is 845 millimeters from the ground. The price, 8,690 euros ex-dealer, includes an impressive array of features that I'm about to tell you about. A lot of substance on paper, but will it really be the same when riding? Let's find out in our test ride. Okay, here we are on the Zontes F703. Make yourselves comfortable because there's a lot to talk about here. First thing, as you can see, there's no ignition key because I have the keyless system in my pocket. I just ask you to pay a bit of attention because when you turn off the bike, like in this case with the handlebars free, if you need to maneuver and maybe back the bike out of a parking spot and you turn, listen, the handlebars lock and it goes into steering lock mode. Now I'll proceed to unlock everything and then let's meticulously start it up. And well, there's indeed a considerable amount to thoroughly discuss because Zontes has truly and remarkably packed this particular motorcycle with an impressive array of numerous features. First of all, there's a very clear and vibrant TFT display. And down here, as you can clearly see, there's a small convenient knob that allows you to precisely adjust the tilt depending on the individual rider's height and personal preference. Here under this rubber cover, there are 2 USB ports, a USB-C and a standard USB. The switchgear is very well equipped. In some ways, it reminds me a bit of the Africa Twins. The instrument cluster, I have to say, is very comprehensive. Among the various pieces of information it provides, this is just one of the screens. We'll look at the others in a moment. It also shows tire pressure and their temperatures, coolant temperature, fuel level among the indicators, as you can see. Now I'm going to switch screens. There's also the range, the average fuel consumption, which in this case is 6 liters per 100 kilometers. But we're just at the beginning of the test, and the selected riding mode, which you can change here with the mode button. There are 2 modes, Eco and Sport. Let's call it Eco. Starting from the right switch cluster, the mode button lets you change the riding modes. There are heated grips, and on the left switch cluster there's a button to activate or deactivate traction control, a button to adjust the windshield. So one press on the button and then you can use the slider to set the windshield to your preferred height and electric seat release, which is a bit of a signature feature from Zontes. Then by holding down the OK button for a long sustained press, we can seamlessly enter the main menu and thoroughly explore the various functions and comprehensive settings available. These include the detailed bike settings, where you have the ability to precisely calibrate the internal clock, meticulously set up how do you save the wireless Bluetooth connection, or conveniently change the unit of measurement, such as from kilometers to miles, or even adjust the display language to your preference. Let's go back now. You can all just, as I mentioned, choose the interface. This is the sport interface, but we also have the stylish one, the adventure one, or the urban one. And finally, there's also the navigator, which is a map-based navigator, as you can clearly see, but it obviously needs to be activated by downloading the official Zontes app and enabling the maps. So everything is completely free, I have to say, which is quite interesting. And once it's activated, you can even use it with your phone conveniently turned off. This is a truly useful feature. Let's go back to our menu. Let's take a look at the other functions. We've already covered the interface. The information section includes everything you can access by scanning the QR code to find out what might not be working on your bike, if necessary. DVR, on the other hand, refers to the two dash cams. The two dash cams, this bike is equipped with a front dash cam and a rear dash cam. As you can see here, we can activate the cameras, which are continuously recording, and through the app you can download what they record, so they can also be used as action cams. If in this case I activate the front camera playback, as you can see, it will show me the image. Here are all the files I've recorded so far, and it lets me review them. Here you can see we are seeing exactly what was recorded just 2 seconds ago, so it's kind of like watching a movie. As I was saying, this camera records continuously, so it then downloads, or rather deletes the older files. And then lastly, in the radio control section, you can choose to activate the quick shift, which in this case is unidirectional, and to deactivate the ABS on the rear axle, because as you know, you can no longer deactivate it on the front axle unless you have an off-road map, which in this case is not available. I hold down here, we go back to our sport interface, which was the one I liked the most, and we start again. So really a lot of features, as you can see. Even the Marzocchi fork is adjustable, preload on both legs, rebound on the right leg, and compression on the left leg. Let's say that at this point the equipment is really high end. Well, if we consider that the bike costs just over 8,000 euros, the onboard equipment is really not negligible. Sure, the electric seat release might be a bit of a luxury, but everything that's included is really well made. At a glance, when you're sitting on the bike, I have to say that overall what you see in front of you isn't bad at all. I mean, okay, the silk screen plate, the clamp that holds the handlebar. The handlebar, by the way, offers a nice riding position, maybe just a bit long, but we'll talk more about that when we discuss ergonomics. But I have to say that in terms of quality, as you can see, the cables are well sheathed. There aren't too many cables hanging around, no exposed wires in short. Everything you can see is actually quite well done, especially considering that this bike costs just a little over 8,000 euros. And now, sound check. Let's go take it for a ride. As always, my first point is about ergonomics, and I have to say on the Zontes I actually quite like it. I'll start by saying that often when I test these bikes that are also aimed at beginners, you can always see the manufacturer's intention to put in a very low seat so you can easily reach the ground, but in the end the riding triangle suffers a bit because of it. The truth is that on the Zontes the seat height is 845 millimeters, but the area where you put your feet down is very slim. It's true that the bike feels quite substantial here where the tank is, so the tank widens very abruptly, but it's a 22-liter tank. Still, I can touch the ground pretty well with both feet, as you can see, and above all, I don't end up with my knees very high, very bent, or with the foot pegs too far forward. So, in my opinion, the riding triangle is well balanced. Maybe for me, the distance from the torso to the handlebars is just a bit long, but as you can see, I can turn the handlebars without having to rotate my shoulder too much, so that's a positive. The saddle padding is very good, maybe just a touch less firmness in the cushioning would be nice, but I have to say I've been in the saddle for several days now, and even today for quite a few hours, and I don't mind it at all. I did the test with a passenger, and I have to say it went well. The passenger's feedback about the padding was the same as mine. They would like it, just a bit softer. The handles are well positioned. It's certainly worth noting that the exhaust system runs very, very close to the right handle. So when you come to a complete stop, your hand will really, truly feel the intense heat emanating from the exhaust pipe. The seat is also exceptionally long lengthwise, ensuring it doesn't push you uncomfortably forward. Even after many extended hours spent in the saddle, it significantly helps you comfortably shift your position, which is certainly not something to take for granted at all. The space between the rider's footrest and the passenger's footrest is also good. When you ride on the tip, as you can see, there's still a finger's width of space, so the comfort level is really quite high. All in all, in terms of ergonomics, it's very, very good. And I'll also add the wind protection. At the moment, the windshield is set to its lowest position. It can be raised, as I showed you before we set off, using the electric control. I didn't need to keep it raised because for my height, the setting is already more than enough. When you raise it all the way up, you get a bit of airflow coming from behind. Visually, it's good, though not perfect, because I might actually prefer a slightly lower windshield, at least for my height, so I can always have an unobstructed view when I want to keep it lower. But, well, all things considered, I have to say it's not bad at all. The deflectors here and the handguards that provide protection are also good. So overall, I have to say the wind protection is very good. Today I also tried moving my hands around a bit to see where the air hits my knees. And in this area, the fairing does a good job of cutting the airflow away from the knees. Heat transmission, which is a very sensitive issue these days, it's 35, 36 degrees. So it's not a hot bike, but you do feel a bit of heat, especially in the area under your thighs when you're riding. Some of it comes up from behind here. But if I had to categorize it among bikes, I'd put it in the middle range. Still, let's be honest, when it's over 30, 32, 33 degrees, all bikes get unbearably hot. So in my opinion, Ergonomics got a pass as well, because all the controls are within easy reach. The levers are at the right height, the mirrors work well, and the bike vibrates very little, guys, especially at medium revs. It's an engine that likes to rev, but we'll talk more about the engine later. When you rev through the gears, you do get a bit of vibration on the foot pegs, but honestly, it's a 3-cylinder that vibrates very little. And I have to say, there are much more renowned 3-cylinders out there that vibrate a lot more than this one from Zontes. So from that point of view, the Chinese at Zontes have really done an excellent job. I have to say that more or less that's everything about the ergonomics. So I'll continue my ride because I still have quite a few kilometers to cover. See you in the next segment where we'll talk about the engine. Second update, we're now almost at 500 kilometers, and I want to dedicate this to the engine. There's quite a lot to say about this engine because it's a bit, in short, the 3-cylinder engines are the new feature introduced by Chinese manufacturers. This engine is made by Zontes, 699cc, 95 horsepower, so it can also be detuned for the A2 license with regular timing. We know that CF has also released the 675, so let's say the Chinese are evolving a bit, increasing the number of cylinders and also boosting performance. An engine entirely made by Zontes, because Zontes does everything in-house. The frame is made by them in-house, as well as the swing arm and the engine. There's a lot to say, because you might think that a 3-cylinder engine on an adventure bike like this is a bit out of place, an issue we've already discussed when we tested the Triumph Tigers. You might expect this engine to have a lot of top-end power and revs, but maybe not much torque at low RPM. In reality, Zontes has worked very carefully and cleverly on this engine, which has good low-end, strong mid-range, and is super flexible. I just tried it now, riding up here to the summit of Panacea Place. That, by the way, also reminds me of my first trip with my 125. Maybe I'll show you a vintage photo of Cordara with his 125 park right down here. So it was really nice for me to come back here after quite a few years. An engine that I have to say Zontes has worked on in a really clever way. It has great mid-range, solid low end, super flexible. Honestly, I was climbing up here, even in third gear, and it pulls even at 1000 RPM. It gets you through. It doesn't vibrate much, in fact. It hardly vibrates at all, except for a little bit on the right foot peg when you really rev it up. The red line starts at 8000 RPM, so you can tell the engine has been tuned to work best at low and mid-range. But it still stretches out to about 10,800 RPM. These thick red zones on Chinese bikes always make me smile a bit, where the red line starts quite early, but then the limiter actually kicks in much later, quite a bit further on. The gearbox is really good, for example, because the clutch engages very well, is very soft to pull, and really well calibrated. The gearbox, when used with the clutch, is also very good, both when shifting up and down. I have to say some brands with a bigger reputation could actually learn a thing or two from this transmission. And there's also a good quick shifter. I have to say it's a bit of an old school quick shifter, because since this bike doesn't have electronic throttle light, has a cable throttle, the quick shifter only works by cutting the ignition, so you get some pretty strong jolts. But it's nice and fast. It only works on upshifts, not downshifts, because without ride-by-wire, the bike can do the so-called blip, which is the automatic throttle blip when downshifting. But the gearbox works well. The gear ratios chosen by Zontes are quite short, which gives it that pull in the mid and low range and this super flexibility. When you're at 130 kilometers per h, you're at about 5,800 revolutions per minute. There's still a good margin, and the engine always feels lively in terms of sound, because the exhaust note is also very, very good. There are two riding modes, which you can switch between at any time, whether the throttle is open or closed. You just press the button and it changes mode. The weak point, as with almost all engines with a cable throttle, is the throttle response from 0 to the very first degrees of opening. In this case, the on-off effect is quite noticeable, especially in sport mode, which I haven't used at all these days because I find it a bit too much. But even in E mode, which I think stands for eco, more or less, you really notice it when you're riding slowly in traffic or when you have to take a tight hairpin turn. I always keep two fingers on the clutch to help smooth out this on-off effect, which is particularly noticeable, and in my opinion is perhaps the only weak point of the engine, because honestly everything else works really well. When you have the throttle in hand, when you're in the flow, when you don't have to close it or bring it all the way to 0, the throttle response is nice and present, and it's also pleasantly direct. The on-off effect, which like pretty much all manufacturers do when they have a cable throttle, they try to mitigate by making the throttle travel quite long. And in fact, on the Zontes, the throttle travel is pretty long as well, but this doesn't actually manage to eliminate it. But more than the on-off effect, in my opinion, what's really worth mentioning is that the engine braking is quite strong. Maybe with a little less engine braking, the bike would be a bit smoother, and this on-off effect would be reduced. You also notice it when the engine re-engages after the cutoff, meaning that phase where closing the throttle completely cuts off the fuel to the cylinders up to a certain RPM, and then when it comes back on, the bike gives a slight little jump forward. But that said, this is kind of the big issue with all bikes that have a cable throttle. The engine maybe takes a second or two longer than I expected to rev up, but you have to consider that it has to push a bike that weighs 220 kilos with spoked wheels, a 21-inch front and an 18-inch rear, so there's a lot of inertia. I expect that on the Zontes sport bike it will perform much better, because when it comes to power, it definitely has it. So the gearing is well balanced. The gears are fairly close together, which means you end up using higher gears. Quite often you're always riding in 4th, 5th or 6th. The engine can handle it, so in the end it's pleasant, and using these higher gears also helps smooth out the on-off effect, which you really feel a lot in 1st, 2nd and 3rd. That's something I always notice with Chinese engines these days. Basically, the engine calibration is always a step behind compared to what we are now used to finding on more, let's say, refined engines. But maybe refined isn't the right word, because the engine here really is refined. However, the throttle management deserves to be reconsidered, because it's a shame it somewhat spoils the great riding experience of this bike, which otherwise works really well. So far, fuel consumption is 6.1 liters per 100 kilometers. Maybe that's not the best in its class, but it is a 3-cylinder and it revs a bit high. So inevitably, the fuel consumption is affected a little. Let's see at the end of our test where I'll end up after doing a bit of highway, mixed roads, uphill, downhill, in short, everything you might encounter, including city driving in our daily life. I'd say that now I'll continue my ride and I'll dedicate the last part to the chassis. I've saved it for last because it takes me a bit longer to understand certain things, which I'll tell you about in the next segment. Huh? What amazing places there are in Italy, guys. Quick digression about off-road driving, which obviously isn't my specialty. I wish Simo Zaffa or Federico Faccioni were here to talk about it, but I found it pretty well balanced. Even though the setup I was given was more road-oriented, so stiffer, you can definitely dial it back a lot by softening the suspension. For my skill level, I found that overall the bike isn't bad, even when riding standing up, I have to say, because I actually like the riding triangle. The foot pegs aren't too far back, I don't have to stand up too much, and it's not too much effort for me to get up. Obviously the handlebar is a bit low, I would like slightly higher rises, but all in all for a street enduro I'd say it's not bad. I noticed that when you ride standing up and want to move forward, the tank suddenly gets really wide. On the other hand, the rear is very tapered, which allows you to move back far enough. So all in all, I repeat, given my skills which are almost zero, I found the bike pretty easy. I also still notice, unfortunately, that the on-off throttle response is a bit rough, and that's a shame because this engine is so smooth and gives you a lot of traction, but when you go to open the throttle, it gives you a little jolt, which is always a bit unsettling. And the brake doesn't engage immediately and has a bite that's a bit too aggressive for off-road. Maybe that could be softened a bit, but in any case, if you want to ride on roads like these gravel ones, or even a bit tougher than just simple gravel roads, there's no problem at all. And anyway, when you go off-road, this weight distribution, 51% on the front axle, which is almost like a sports bike, well, you do feel it. You can tell the front is heavy, so you have to shift back a bit to compensate. But all things considered, I have to say the bike handles very well. Honestly, I expected worse, but I've tried bikes with more off-road ambitions than this one and actually had a harder time with it. So in my opinion, really not bad at all. A quick side note, something very clever that shows the attention to detail Zontes puts in, right? Very clever is the small pouch that comes standard here, mounted on the right side. I mean, it's not huge, but you can fit a puncture repair kit, a compact rain jacket, and maybe a few tools. Why not? It works, it's good, and is designed to, let's say, balance out the look of the exhaust. And then here as well, there's a small guard for the turn signal, because this is where the hot air from the exhaust comes out. So there are a few thoughtful details on this bike. Here there's some aluminium overall. I have to say it's well made, not bad at all. Last topic, I dedicated it to the chassis, and I said I left it for last because I wanted to really understand how this bike works. When you first get on it, especially if you haven't ridden a 21-inch for a while, you're a bit thrown off at first, partly because of the feel of the 21-inch wheel, which is a typical trait of large diameter wheels, but also because the front end feels a bit vague. I rode for a while, covered a lot of miles, and I have to say that now I've come to a bit of a conclusion. In my opinion, the chassis of this bike is solid. Design is there. What somewhat takes away from the riding pleasure is precisely the 21-inch front wheel, especially the stock tire, which is a Michelin Anarchy Adventure. You know that when we tested this tire, even on the R1000 GS Adventure Rain Short, on every bike I've tried it on, I've always pointed out a bit of a drift. That is, it's a tire that when you release the brakes tends to make the bike fall into the inside of the curve, and when you're in the middle of the turn and want to start pushing, it doesn't have lateral grip, so the bike tends to drift a bit. I've always noticed all of this on the 19-inch, on the 120/70th -19 of the Maxi Enduros, and on the 21-inch I find it a bit more pronounced. I also have to point out something, probably the place where the tires are made also makes a bit of a difference in how they handle. These are made in Thailand, and the ones from the adventure I tried in Spain, maybe I'm not sure, but I think there is some small difference. So going back to the chassis, the bike was delivered to me by Zontes with a more road-oriented setup. That means it's set to 1.25 turns out from fully closed on both compression and rebound of the fork, and 5 clicks less on compression. So it's a fairly firm setup, because this bike with 180 millimeters of travel front and rear has what you could call an enduro setup, 18 and 21. So this is the particular mix that Zontes wanted to create. By tightening it up like this, it definitely becomes more suitable and more effective for riding on the road. There's this flexibility, as I mentioned, when changing direction, and there's this feeling that when you start to push a bit, let's say the front end immediately reminds you to take it a bit easier. In my opinion, 80% of this feeling you get while riding is actually due to this type of front tire. I would like to try the Zontes 703F again with a different set of tires from other brands, maybe even another street model from Michelin, perhaps with a less knobby tread, because I'm convinced that would help me regain a good part of that feeling. That said, as I mentioned, I think the chassis is solid, it's well built, the suspension works well from the start, they move together, they're never out of place, and maybe the fork compresses a bit quickly even though it's been tightened up quite a bit. But I have to say that overall the bike remains balanced. A note about the braking system which still doesn't quite convince me. The calipers are branded Kotak 1. It's a system we're familiar with. There's a radial master cylinder on the front, and overall the rear setup isn't bad. Maybe when you start pushing a bit, I'd like a little more power, so that's where we are. But the rear disc is a bit quirky because it sometimes whistles, so occasionally it makes some noise when you brake lightly, not really hard, just barely off the throttle at low speed. The front, on the other hand, has plenty of power, but the issue is that there's a bit of a long dead travel in the lever before you actually start braking. It's as if the system needs to settle a bit before it reaches the pressure point. In my opinion, the dead travel should be a bit shorter, also because when you happen to ride a bit fast and need the brakes to be immediately responsive, the braking always comes a little late, or when you need to brake suddenly, there's always that split second of delay compared to when I'd like it to actually start braking. Then the braking comes, the bite is quite strong, nice and sharp, and as mentioned, it makes the fork dive rather abruptly. But even in this case, the bike always remains balanced, it doesn't unload the rear too much, and it doesn't trigger unnecessary ABS interventions. So from that point of view, I have to say that Zontes has done a good job. I have to say that all things considered, I like the bike. What I find with these products coming from China is a bit of immaturity, maybe a few rough edges to smooth out, but not products that are wrong or off the radar. The bike is here, it's well designed, it works, it weighs 220 kilos, so it's lighter than other Chinese bikes and often even lighter than some non-Chinese bikes, let's say in this category. And it has this characteristic that I like to try again with different tires. As I was saying, in my opinion, the design of the 703 is solid, more than solid. It just needs to be refined in a few areas, not least the on-off throttle response, which slightly detracts from the riding pleasure. Once you learn to manage it, it bothers you less. And I should also mention that there are bikes with much more prestigious names and much higher prices that have this kind of issue. For example, the Triumph 1200 Tiger, just to name one, which we also talked about last year. I mean, it's not a characteristic unique to these Chinese bikes. Quite a few bikes have it. Once you learn how to handle these things, like the tire that doesn't grip, then you can manage to ride the bike. But in my opinion, tires are cheap to replace. So from that perspective, you can quickly improve the on-off response. In short, I'd ask Zontes to make a small update or maybe install a ride-by-wire system to have even better throttle control. So to quickly recap, the engine is very good, really nice to use. It doesn't vibrate much, it's super flexible. It lets you stay in a high gear even when you're coming out of hairpin turns in third overall. Really, really good. The fuel consumption recorded so far is 6.0 liters per 100 kilometers, so that's about 15 or 16 kilometers per liter. As I mentioned earlier, it uses a bit more fuel compared to the others, but it's a 3-cylinder, so that's understandable. As for the chassis, I found it to be quite well balanced, though it would be worth trying it with slightly different tires. These are, over these 1,000 kilometers, the notes I took on the Zontes 703F Adventuria bike that many people asked me to test, and that I was also curious to try, because when I saw it at Lake, they told me there was a very unique project here. I wanted to understand how they managed to put all these things together on a single motorcycle, and I'll be waiting for you down in the comments to discuss this bike, priced at 8,690 euros. Remember, the price is always important when evaluating bikes like this. Let's talk about it. About other Chinese bikes, non-Chinese bikes, European bikes, anything you want, right here in the comment. I think we'll wrap it up here. I still have a good 150 kilometers to go before I get home, so the 1,000-kilometer journey will last a bit longer. But in the meantime, I'll see you in the next video.